Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another MMA breakdown video. This is my video response to another dude that I follow who was talking about Joe Rogan sometimes overstepping the boundaries of what he says in the octagon. So he was going on to say that he respects Joe Rogan, he watches his podcast, he subscribes to him on YouTube, and he always enjoys listening to what Joe Rogan has to say. And he says Joe Rogan is one of those phenomenal commentators who knows what he does. He knows basically more about MMA than the average fan, more than the average commentator, because Joe Rogan trains mixed martial arts, and he trains Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu on a regular basis, so he knows what's going on there. That's why sometimes you can actually hear Joe Rogan be talking, and Mike, Mike, whatever the dude's last name is, I can't remember his last name right now, but his co-host basically sometimes doesn't know everything that's going on, and Joe Rogan has to correct him. But he said this in his video, that he kind of gets upset when Joe Rogan comes out and says, hey, where do you go from here? Like, he was talking to Dan Henderson, like, is it time for Dan Henderson to pack his bags up and quit? I mean, he is 43 years old. There's not much more you can accomplish in the game of mixed martial arts. He's 43. I don't really see Dan Henderson ever winning a UFC title. I don't see Dan Henderson becoming a number one contender. I just really think it's his time has come. He can beat top guys. He can beat guys that are like number 10, number 8, but he can't beat guys that are like Cormier. He just gets outclassed. I think if he would have fought John Jones would have mopped the floor with Dan Henderson. I don't think Dan Henderson really uses his full potential as a fighter anymore. Dan Henderson does, what's he do? He stands and bangs as a true fighter, yes, but he's a wrestler at heart. And when was the last time you seen Dan Henderson shooting for a takedown and ground and pound somebody? I haven't seen that in a very long time. But I think what Joe Rogan says a lot of times is just straight off the head and might not necessarily mean it at a certain time. And sometimes when you have to ask the tough questions, hey, Dan, are you going to retire soon? Is your career up? And Dan Henderson was basically like, nah, I'm still going to compete, but I'm probably going to compete at 185 pounds because I didn't realize how big these 205-pound guys are, because Daniel Cormier cuts from like 230 or something like that down to 205, and Dan Henderson didn't even barely make 205. He basically made 199, barely made the fight, okay? That's telling you Dan Henderson probably walks around to like 185, 190, or whatever to make this weight class. And to be saying that, I think Dan Henderson, no disrespect to him, did get ragdolled, okay? I've never seen Dan Henderson slammed, and he goes on to say in his video saying that it was disrespectful that Dan Henderson got called basically ragdolled like a little children by Daniel Cormier, because Daniel Cormier threw him around like a little kid. It kind of looks like that, and sometimes, like I said, it could happen in the moment where you say something like that and you really don't mean it. Did it really look like he was getting thrown around like he was not a top-level fighter, that he wasn't that great? Yeah, Daniel Cormier looked like a beast. I've never seen a fighter, not even back in the Quentin Rampage Jackson days when Rampage was slamming people, never pick somebody up like Dan Henderson over their head and do like a WWF body slam. And this dude slammed him so freaking hard, I thought Dan Henderson was out. Dan Henderson fell, and Dan Henderson, I don't even think landed one punch or one kick during the whole fight. That's amazing how great Daniel Cormier is. But I think Joe Rogan a lot of times says stuff throughout the fight, not intentionally, to hurt people's feelings. Like like for example, sometimes Joe Rogan says, throw more leg kicks, which he knows if you're a fighter that could throw a lot of leg kicks, throw a lot of leg kicks. Like he always used to tell Rampage, dude, throw fucking leg kicks, because if you throw a lot of leg kicks, you're going to damage your opponent. And yes, he gets more excited about the jiu-jitsu guys because he trains jiu-jitsu. And when some guy goes in for like a jiu-jitsu submission, he's like, "Grr." He's really pumped up for the guy who really knows a lot about submissions or really a high-level grappler. But I'll say this. And the last thing he asked in his video is, he said, do you want to fight at middleweight? And he said probably because, like I said earlier in the video, that fighters at 205 and heavyweight are just too big for him, right? Okay, yes, Dan Henderson has beaten heavyweights. He beaten Fedor Emelianenko. But my thing is, if Dan Henderson fights at 185, he's going to be fighting Lyoto Machidas. He's going to be fighting the Anderson Silvas. He's going to be fighting the Chris Wymans, the Jacares. These dudes are an incredible beast. And there's a time and place for fighters to say, okay, I'm not as great as I once was. I have to pack the bags up and I have to leave. In Dan Henderson's last couple fights, his record is Dan Henderson was in Strikeforce. He was on a 4-fight win streak, okay? And then once he got back to the UFC, fighting at UFC 157 against Lyoto Machida, he lost that fight. Then he goes on at UFC 161, fighting Rashad Evans and loses that fight. Then gets brutally knocked out against Vitor Belfort, right? Then goes on to the fight where he fought Shogun Rua and loses that, and wins that fight and loses the Daniel Cormier fight. So out of the last 4 fights or 5 fights, he's only won 1 fight. So that's telling you something, that their career is on the down slope. Look at Tito Ortiz, for example. Went on like a 6 or 7 fight losing streak until he fought Ryan Bader and then beat Ryan Bader. So I'll say this: do I want to see Dan Henderson compete and fight? Yeah, I still think he has a chance, but he has an MMA record of 30 wins and 12 losses. Dan Henderson is a great fighter. He's 43 years old, but I think his time has come and gone. He is still one of the top guys, I think, but he just uses his knockout power. That's what he does. He doesn't really use his wrestling like Randy Couture. Randy Couture, I bet you, if Randy Couture was still fighting, I think could dominate Dan Henderson with the wrestling. He could, because Randy Couture used to use his wrestling against a lot of top guys and dominate fighters. But if you have a record of 5 fights and you only won 1 out of your 5 fights and you're losing, you lost a split decision to Rashad Evans, a split decision to Lyoto Machida, and you got brutally knocked out by Vitor, and you got basically ragdolled by Daniel Cormier. Maybe it is a time you should just tap out and give up. I'm not saying he has nothing to gain. I still think he has no chance to be a champion. He's just going to be one of those guys who will always be like top 10, top 6, but he'll never be a champion anymore. I don't see him beating any of those top guys at 185 pounds. Those guys are complete and utter beast. So, with that being said, the last win he actually had before he went on this losing streak was at UFC 139 against Shogun. That is crazy. In November 19, 2011 was the last time really Shogun was on a winning streak, beating Fedor, then he beat Shogun, then he went on this 3-fight losing streak, then he beat Shogun again and lost to Daniel Cormier. But with that being said, guys, hit the like button, subscribe button. Let me know what you think of Joe Rogan, and do you think Dan Henderson should actually be looking to retire right now, or do you guys still think he has something to gain? You think he's a champion at 185? I don't think he's a champion at 185 or at 205. I just think the guy's going to be one of those guys. He's one of those dudes, is a one-trick pony. I'm not saying the dude sucks, but it sounds like I am. But I haven't seen him go for submissions in a very long time. Haven't seen him go for takedowns in a very long time. He stands here and throws punches. And that's why a lot of fighters used to be able to beat up Quentin, because Quentin is supposedly a good wrestler, never uses his wrestling, never goes for takedowns, and all he does is stand and box. And that's what Dan Henderson does, is stand in there and try to go for the knockout blow. Yes, when he lands a knockout punch, he can knock your ass out. But if he can't land a knockout punch, he basically gets beat down. So, before this video gets 10 minutes long, I'll definitely talk to you next time. But, dude, Wilson, I think your name is, I support your videos. I know you support my videos. Thanks for always watching and subscribing. And I'll definitely see you guys soon. I'm getting ready to go pack and head out to the cruise ship because I'm going to the Bahamas. But I wanted to throw this video up and just say, dude, I see what your point is, but I kind of see where Joe Rogan is saying where maybe it is time for Hendo to pack his bags.